What's up guys, welcome back to our Python Basics series. Today we're talking about for loops. This is one of two types of loops that we're going to learn, so let's take a look. A for loop is used for iterating over a sequence. From the data types we've learned so far, we can use for loops to iterate lists, tuples, dictionaries, and strings. Using the for loop, we can execute a set of statements for each item in these data types. To see exactly what this means, it's easiest to hop into some examples. The first example we're going to look at are lists. Let's create a variable named cars and set it equal to a list. Within this list, let's go ahead and add our cars. We'll add Tesla, Audi, and BMW. We'll then come over and we'll add our quotes so that these are strings, and separate everything by a comma. Outside of our variable, let's create a for loop. The syntax for creating a for loop is we say for, and then we create a new variable named car, and we can say in cars, and then we'll come down and we'll print car. Notice how the code that needs to be executed is indented in line 8. If we look at what this for loop's doing, it says for car, and car is a variable that we can then reference inside the for loop. And then we say in cars, which is our list variable, we're going to print that car. When we run this, you'll see that it prints out each one of the cars. The first iteration of this for loop sets car equal to Tesla, and it prints Tesla. The second iteration sets car equal to Audi and prints Audi. The third and final iteration of this for loop sets car equal to BMW, and it prints BMW. If we come up in our code, we can switch this to be a tuple instead of a list. When we run this now, you can see that it does the same thing. It iterates through each item within the tuple and prints it out. If we come back in our code, we can also do the same thing with dictionaries. I'm going to go ahead and switch these to curly brackets so that we have a dictionary data type. I'm also going to add values for each of these keys. When we run this now, you can see that it prints out each key within our dictionary. If we came in our code and we printed cars instead of car, and we use the key car, it'll now print the values. If we were to run this, you'll see that it prints electric, gas, gas. That's because for each iteration, it's setting the key equal to car. In line 8, we say print, and we reference the dictionary cars and pass in the car key. For the first iteration, car is set to the key Tesla, and when we print cars car, it's using the cars dictionary with the key Tesla, and the key Tesla maps to electric, so it prints out electric. It then does the same thing for Audi and BMW. If we wanted to, we could come in our code and say cars.values, and then we could get rid of this and just print out car. Now, rather than iterating the dictionary keys, it's going to iterate the values. When this is ran, you'll see that it prints out electric, gas, gas. We can also use .keys, but there's really no point. The only other one I wanted to go over was .items. If we come back in our code and we say cars.items instead of values, you'll see that when we run it, it returns tuples with the key and the value pairs. The last one we're going to go over are strings. Let's come in our code and delete everything. We'll create a new variable named name and set it equal to my name, Mitchell. We'll then come down and create another for loop, but this time, let's say letter in name. That letter that you see can be anything you want as long as it's not a reserved word. It's essentially a variable that you're just going to reference inside the for loop. We'll then come down and we'll print out the letter. Once again, this is the exact same syntax. We have for and then a variable in name, which is our string, and then we have the colon, and then we indent print letter. When this is ran, you'll see that it prints out each letter of my name. The next thing we're going to look at is the range function. This is a built-in function to loop through a set of code a specific number of times. For example, we could come in our code and say for num in range 10, and then we can print out the num. When we run this, you'll see that it prints out 10 numbers. You'll notice that it starts at 0 and stops at 9, just like how we do indexing. If you wanted this to print out 1 through 10 instead of 0 through 9, you could say 1 comma 11. When this is ran, you'll see that it prints out 1 through 10. And then the last one that I wanted to introduce is Enumerate. Enumerate allows us to get the index and the value from an iterable at the same time. Let's go back to our original example and put our cars variable set equal to Tesla, Audi, and BMW. Often when people are trying to index, they'll do something like this. They'll say index equals 0, do a for loop by saying for car and cars, and then they'll print index comma car, and then they'll do index plus equals 1. What this is doing is it's starting the index at 0, and then each time it goes through, it prints out what the index is and the car, and then it adds 1 to the index, so then the next time the index goes up by 1. If we ran this, you'll see that the 0th index is Tesla, first is Audi, second is BMW. While this works, it's much better to use enumeration. What we'll do is we'll come in our code and we'll get rid of these lines. Rather than having that index variable, we're going to use the enumeration function. To do this, we're going to have 2 variables instead of just 1. So we'll say for index comma car. So we're still doing the index and we're still keeping the car variable. But when we say in, we use enumerate, and then we say cars. What this is doing is each time we go through, it's setting the index as well as the car so that we don't have to keep that count. We then add our semicolon and indented down here, we can print index comma car. When we run this, you'll see that it prints out the exact same thing. Now that we've seen how to use for loops, let's do an example program to see how we could actually use them. What we're going to do is create a function that we can call to print a triangle. It takes a base so that it knows how big to make the triangle. For this example, we're going to do a nested for loop just so you can see how these work, but then I'll show you how to do it without one. We'll come up here and delete our code. Just so that you can see how this is going to work, if we gave a base of 3, it would print something like this. If we gave it a base of 4, we would expect something like this. To actually create this, let's define a new function. We'll name this triangle. So we'll say def triangle, and it's going to take in the base. Within the function, let's use our first for loop and say for I in range base. This is telling us how many times we need to iterate through so that we can build the base that we want. We'll add the colon and come down and add our nested for loop. For this one, I'm going to say for j in range, and we're going to use I plus 1. Since the range of base is starting at 0, counting up towards the base, I is always going to be 1 less than the stars we need, which is why we're putting I plus 1 in line 3. Within our nested for loop, we're going to print a star, and then we're going to set the end equal to a blank space instead of a new line. Outside of our nested for loop, we're going to add another print statement, and we're going to use \r. All this is doing is a carriage return. We're going to come down and outside of our function, and we're going to say if double underscore name double underscore equals equals, and then we'll say double underscore main, and then we'll call our function and pass in a base of 5. If name equals equals main is something new that we have not learned yet, there'll be a video in the future explaining how we use this and why we use it. For now, it's good to at least introduce this concept. So if we're looking at exactly what this code is doing, it's calling the triangle function and passing in a base of 5. The outer for loop goes for I in range 5, so 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. For each iteration of that, there's a nested for loop that says for j in range I plus 1. It then prints the stars, and once that nested for loop is done, it carriage returns to a new line. So more specifically, the first for loop, I is set to 0. It then executes the nested for loop. Since I is 0 and we have range of I plus 1, that's really range of 1. So now j is set equal to 0. We never use j, we're just telling it how many times to print the star, which is once. Once it prints that star, it's done with the for loop. It then carriage returns to a new line and goes back to our main for loop for the next iteration. Since I was 0 the first time, now it's 1. In the nested for loop, it's saying for j in range 2, since I is 1 and we're adding 1, and then it prints the stars. So the first time that nested for loop runs, j is 0, it prints a star, then it runs again and j is 1 and it prints a star, before finishing the nested for loop, carriage returning, and coming up for the third iteration. It does this until range of base is complete in line 2. When we run this, you'll see that it prints out the triangle with a base of 5. To show how we would do this without a nested for loop, I'll come in our code and remove this portion. I'll then say print, and we'll print the star, but to know how many, we'll just use our I variable, and we'll add 1 since it's off by 1, since it starts as 0. If we run this code, you can see that it achieves the same thing, except it eliminates the need for a nested for loop. This just shows that there's lots of ways to achieve the same thing in programming, so it's really up to you. This is a good introduction to for loops. As you continue working with them, there will be more concepts we learn and you will understand everything they can offer. In the next episode, we're going to be talking about the other loop, which is a while loop. Thank you for watching and please like, comment, share, and subscribe.